Let's get it done. All right, so we're going to talk about Ember today. Hopefully everybody's in the right place. Yay, Ember. Is anybody using Ember right now? Yeah! Awesome, some people are. That's really good. Okay, so I'm Dave. Oh, why is it not working? That's lame. Here, I need my clicker. I can't do anything without this clicker. It's like my safety harness. Okay, there we are. I'm Dave. This is Mike. We are on the Hub team, also known as the Open Data team. The Hub's the new, the Open Data is the old. It's all the same code, but you know, when all else fails, just change names. That might have happened a few times at ESRI, right? And we work for the DC R&D Center, but as the pictures might indicate, we're based in Colorado because it's a nice place to live, I guess. So that's cool. Let's talk about Ember. I'm going to basically break this hour into two sections. I'm going to talk about why Ember and have a lot of crazy slides and stuff, and then Mike's going to do the hard work and he's going to build an Ember application right here, right there. It's going to be really fun and exciting. And then I'm going to narrate it. So that'll be interesting too. Oh yeah, the live coding slide. So let's start off with why do we use a framework at all, right? I'm not going to go through the Ember comparison to everything else. Kind of did that yesterday. I like using frameworks because it's all about the choices we don't have to make. Jack pays us to build stuff that our customers want to use. Jack does not want to pay me to go figure out how to do a build process for my JavaScript. You know, in the past we had to kind of work on that stuff, but it's way easier if we can just say, ooh, use Ember, and bang, you get that for free. It's also that we can avoid choices that we're going to come to regret, right? If you have an entire community that's building on something, the chances are, you know, the collective wisdom of a huge community is better than the choices that an individual is going to make. So there's less chance that bad decisions are going to get made and, you know, you get left off the back. So Ember really provides us, in addition to a whole bunch of little Tomsters, gives us a groundwork for building very audacious applications. And so that's ArcGIS Open Data is our current kind of front-facing app. It's a single instance app. It's multi-tenant, meaning we deploy like one payload, and then that lights up 3,800 organizations, which means there are at least 3,800 customized websites that are out there. So these are a few screenshots of this. There's a whole drag and drop, you know, create your own website experience with this. We're extending that model. Particularly the hub thing is really kind of taking open data and making the search context of that a lesser thing and promoting the idea of sites and pages to kind of a core concept in the ArcGIS platform. So this is a little bit about the information model that we're having to extend ourselves into. And then we have to have pretty complex rules. We just recently migrated everybody's site from being something that was contained in the open data backend. So if you were in the last talk where we had a JSON API discussion, we moved from containing the sites in there, and now they are items in ArcGIS Online, which is cool, but now we have to live within the ArcGIS Online permission environment. So privileges, roles, membership in different organizational structures, all of that stuff needs to be checked on a per route basis, and then sometimes, you know, do we show or hide buttons? Do we control access to things? And so we need a system that's going to support this sort of thing, right? This is what Jack wants to pay us for, not build processes. The admin application is much larger than the front-end application, and so we have all kinds of capabilities in here. And Ember really shines for this sort of stuff, right? When you have deeply nested routes and the ability to kind of compose your application out of components. So 2 years ago when we started the Open Data project, it was a Backbone app and an Angular 1 app for the admin area. We reconverted all of that stuff once we got this long-term vision for the idea we're going to expand this massively. It's going to be the hub and a core piece of online. We said, okay, we don't really want to try and scale up this Backbone app. And Angular 1, well, that's going to go away. So we pivoted and rewrote everything in less than a year on Ember, and now we're in a way better platform to grow this thing and build a whole lot more features into it. We're not the only ones at ESRI using this. The operations dashboard team is based on Ember, as is the workforce web application, the manager part of it. So yay, Ember. For those of you who've worked with Ember before, you know this. It's a very opinionated framework. And some people, like Mike had mentioned in the previous one, if you can get along with it, it's fantastic. Again, because those opinions mean you have to make less decisions. You can get away with not having to worry too much about it because Ember has a command line interface. And essentially this is a set of node scripts that you run, and it helps you build, deploy, and scaffold your application, which is hugely helpful because in order to work with Ember, you have to put folders in the right place. You have to make sure your files are named very specifically. So while you can use Ember without Ember CLI, it's painful and there's not really a good reason to. The other upside is that all your Ember CLI apps are completely consistent. So as we start to build more and more applications that are going to kind of spread out across online and things like that, we want to make sure that anybody we onboard onto our team or other teams that have to start collaborating with us, all the apps look exactly the same in terms of their structure and how they work. Again, the idea that we need to build for the future, we really like the idea that Ember has this mantra of stability without stagnation. So we started coding last year, and we have to plan for like at least a 5-year life cycle on these series of code that we're writing. But we don't want to be stuck with mid-2015 technology 5 years from now. So that's really what Ember's kind of commitment to is that they're not going to break your app every 2 years to get new functionality. They're going to slowly migrate you along. That comes in the form of what they call the 6-week release train. Every 6 weeks, Ember does a release, and any features that are ready are dropped in on that release. New features start off in master, and they kind of make their way through these series of states, canary, beta, release, and then LTS is a long-term support chain that you can opt into. LTS, the real difference with that is it's every second release, and they commit to giving you any security or critical bug updates for a year. So if you're building an enterprise application that you want to be able to say, okay, good, it's running, I got to go write this other app for 6 months, that's a really good release train to be on, so you can be assured that any sort of critical bugs will be fixed. Another thing that's really cool about this model, right, and a good example of what this system allowed the Ember core team to do was this year they released Glimmer. And Glimmer is a complete rewrite of the entire rendering engine inside of Ember. Basically gives you all the benefits of React, except you didn't have to rewrite any code. So unless you had actually been digging way down into the deep guts of Ember, accessing private APIs, for the most part, nobody had to make any code changes, and you got about 150% rendering improvement in your application. Didn't have to rewrite it in anything else. Hugely beneficial, and just a really cool thing. They put the right seaming and the separation of concerns inside the framework such that they would be able to do this. Now, if you want to take something like a JavaScript framework and evolve it over a 5-year period, at some point you're going to realize, ooh, those choices we made 4 years ago, not so good, and we need to take things out. And they have a system for addressing that as well. And that's a formal deprecation system. So this is probably pretty small to see. This was from the 1.x code change. This was Ember version 1.10. And when we applied 1.10 and you started running it, we got these formal notices in our console. And this is telling us, hey, we've changed a certain syntax on something, and this is going to go away when you upgrade to 2.0. It's going to stay there right now. As long as you're on the 1.x chain, we say it's not going to go away. But as a developer, you'll start seeing these deprecation warnings. This case, it's telling you how to change your syntax. By the way, here's a link to go get more information. As long as you keep up and clear out these deprecation warnings, when you get to the full release period, you don't have any changes to make. Because their big releases are formal deprecations. All they're really doing is taking out that code that they've been telling you slowly over time is deprecated. And in our case, Ember got smaller. That's what happened. The final build to bump to 2.0 just dropped code, which is a really different mentality than many other frameworks. The battle-tested architecture stuff really shows up when you start working with it. The idea of the right seams in the right places is what allowed them to be able to replace the entire rendering engine. We've had many times when we're sitting there trying to conceptualize how we're going to go and weld something in, and you start thinking to yourself, I wonder how I would do this. And you go look in the documentation. Oh, no, there it is. This is exactly where you can slide it in. This idea that building on good architecture patterns that have been proven is really a testament to Tom and Yehuda. Tom Dale, his history is coming from Apple and building stuff on Sprout Core and building big internal systems for them. And then Sprout Core became Ember or got rewritten, but the ideas kind of transferred forward. Tom's now working at LinkedIn, again on Ember, dedicated to the Ember project, but working for them. Yehuda, he's kind of a big deal in the JavaScript world, right? He's on the TC39 committee, which is the people who are saying what is in ES6 and what's going to be in ES7. He's working with Microsoft on TypeScript. What are the different types of syntactic things that we want to add into the, the TypeScript superset of JavaScript? He's a Rails core committer, was a big member of that community for a long time, jQuery core committer, and I think he's involved with Rust Lang as well. So he's got a broad series of experience and a good idea and ideas about how to build a community and marshal a community forward without leaving people falling off the back. It also manifests itself, if you've ever used Rails, within the Rails framework, there's kind of the Rails way of doing things. Once you've learned a little bit of Rails, you'll probably know the next logical step to take, and that manifests inside Ember as well, right? There's the Ember way of doing things and the Ember way of thinking. Once you kind of learn enough Ember, you'll be at a point where you say, I think the next thing I should do is this, and it usually is. And so they've kind of orchestrated the constructs well. I like thinking about this as being the pit of success, right? If you're going to try something like, oh, this seems like the next logical thing, well, good, it is the next logical thing. And you don't get off the rails really hard. We telegraph this to people who join our team that basically once you've learned a little bit of Ember, if it seems hard, there's a pretty good chance you're doing it wrong. You want to step back and say, like, how does Ember conceptualize this piece of work? And then look at applying those patterns to your code. Again, like Rails, we lean heavily on convention over configuration, which is cool, because you end up writing only the code you need, and you end up testing only the code you need, which is cool. And then Ember is going to fill in the rest. So if you didn't write a controller, that's okay. The file's not there. It's not something that's kind of your mandate to take care and maintain. Ember is going to fill in a default implementation. So let's talk a little bit about what working with Ember looks like. When you start an application, you're going to use the Ember CLI. And so that just basically adds a command into your shell. And this works on Windows or OS X or Linux. And you say, Ember new my app. And it goes ahead and it lays out a whole bunch of framework stuff, and then it runs npm and bower. And about 2 minutes later, you have your app. At that point, you can type Ember serve, because this command line tooling interface already has a little server built into it. It's just kind of Express running behind the scenes. And that will spark up, and it's going to open your default browser on port 4200, and you'll see a happy little Tomster there saying, hi, welcome to Ember. Let's build something. From there, usually you're going to run a generator. And so you run EmberG or generate and something like a route, and then the route name, index. So this is cool. You're running that. Your server's still running. That's cool. And then you edit your template. So it's just markup and curly braces. Handlebar syntax is very easy and straightforward. Mike will show some of that. And your things will start auto-updating. And then you might say, okay, well, I've got a route and I've got a main template. Now I'm going to start making components. Components are units of reuse, and that's cool. And if you want to use other people's components, Ember has a whole add-on ecosystem. So you start installing those things so you can use the work of other people and share it. And so that's really cool. As one would expect with modern web frameworks, you've got live reload and you've got hot CSS loading, which is really cool. Those are two handy things. You write your code, you press save, and your browser updates. In the case of Sass or CSS, the browser doesn't even reload. It literally just shoves the compiled CSS or concatenated CSS in, and you just see styles change. Again, like a modern JavaScript framework should, it heavily relies on testing and the idea that you should be able to test everything. So you can write acceptance tests. So this is essentially like running a Selenium test. It's a little different than Selenium in its actual implementation, but it's doing that style of running your full app against your full running API on the back end, although you can put in mocking. You have integration tests, which are super sweet for components. This is basically where you can run your components user interface in a browser, and it's doing this all headless for you. And you can check state. So you can go and press a button and say, okay, did the button say save? Yes. When you clicked on the button, did it call this function? Yes. Did it change its state to saying saving? Yes. After a callback was fulfilled, did it then change the text on the button to saved? All that sort of like micro interaction stuff you can test in isolation with your component, which is super powerful. And then of course unit tests. Everybody's got to write a lot of unit tests, right? You try and decompose your code, write things as pure functions if you can, make them super testable. When you run them, this is test output from our main application. You just see a big wall of text, right? Everything's okay, 561 tests and something like 2,000 assertions passed in that test run. But that's cool, but you don't always want to be manually running your tests, so you can run it in a server mode. So Ember T or Ember Test -S says, hey, run as a service. So in addition to live reloading in the browser that you're actively working in, go ahead and live reload these tests all the time. So it's kind of like continuous testing. So what that does, it opens up in your console, it's going to open up at least 2 tabs. Phantom.js, which is headless Chrome, so you don't actually see a window anywhere, but it's actually running in Chrome, and it runs all your tests. And then there's a second tab up there that says Chrome. That's my default browser. I can also configure this to run any other browser that's on my machine, and if you're on Windows, that can include Internet Explorer and Edge. So you can actually have it continuously. As you're writing code, you press save, these tests fire off and make sure you didn't break something in one of the browsers that you wouldn't see. In the browser that's up and open, I mean, these are running things, they're in your face. So you want to not just be working on your single screen machine, you want to make sure you have a lot of monitors for this sort of stuff. That's how I work all the time, but it's really cool. So then in the ones that are up, you'll see this big wall of things going by, and it's saying everything's cool, and you can fold that up and say, hey, I only want to see the ones that are failing. So it's got really very cool testing integration. Has a build process. As I said, Jack doesn't want to pay me. The build system's called Broccoli. It's really based on tree structures, merging and folding together trees of files, and then applying some functional constructs on them is how Broccoli itself works. But you never really have to worry about it. We've had to do almost nothing with the build process over the years, so that's cool. As I mentioned earlier, Ember is an ecosystem, and that really is because of its strong ideas around add-ons right from the beginning of the project. As they said, okay, well, we want to be able to share things. This was learned from the Ruby on Rails community where they use gems. You need a really good system to make sure, like, hey, all the people doing this, let's share these things together. It's the unit of reuse. It has tooling to say, okay, I want to create a new add-on. So Ember Addon, whatever you want to call it. And then if you want to consume that thing, it's Ember install, whatever that thing is you want to add on. There's also sites where all these things get pulled out, right? They're all stored in NPM, and you can just go to NPM and search, but Ember Addons and EmberObserver.com have these lists of just these things that were tagged as add-ons, and they're pulled out, and these guys run different tests on top of them. So you can see there's the gray things are WP, work in progress, and then the green boxes, although it's very small, they actually apply some form of grading to these add-ons. So ESRI has a mess of add-ons out there. I think almost all of these are from our team. Right now, we're going to show a few of these ones when Mike starts coding. They're all marked work in progress because they're all in closed repositories, although they are publicly usable. Between now and the UC, all of these are going to be opened up. We mostly just need to move them from one org to another in GitHub, and then make sure we're meeting all the checklist requirements for open sourcing stuff at ESRI. But they're all going to go there, and then you can flag issues or pull requests or whatever. When we pack up components and services, we also and that's just common add-on stuff. We also pack up an authentication system, so we're able to bring in OAuth, like ArcGIS Platform OAuth. Are you going to show that? You're going to add it? Yeah. Okay, cool. Mike's actually going to add OAuth in like a minute or so of work, right? Yeah. Something like that. Cool. You can also pack up entire routes. So this is really cool where you can have a part of your application that not too many people want to use, like maybe your admin system. And so you can have it so that it gets lazy loaded, right? When you have a user log in, they have access to the route. As soon as they click on the link, it then downloads just the components that are needed for that. Building an add-on is kind of cool in that it comes with a dummy app, but it's not such a just dummy app. It's a testing ground for your add-on, but it's also how you put out the examples and the documentation for your add-on. So one of the add-ons we're going to be showing today is called Ember ArcGIS Portal Services, which, not surprising, is a set of services for talking to ArcGIS portal or online. And so it abstracts all that stuff out, and our dummy app is, you know, a very streamlined kind of version of being able to search. You can manipulate groups, you can see users, you can see portal properties, you can edit things, but I would say it's a JSON editor. So, you know, like it works really well for us if you're cool with manipulating your items as JSON. It's a thing that's available. Then, of course, once you have your app, you need to deploy it. The Ember community has standardized on using Ember Deploy as the system, which is cool. It's a pluggable, composable system. When we do a deploy of our main public-facing application, we do our build, which is really the first 3 steps up there. We have to package up an entire tree of SaaS, so that's Bootstrap SaaS along with Calcite Bootstrap as an add-on thing. We take all that and then all of the component SaaS files, bundle that up, and then send it off to our SaaS processing service, which is how we do custom theming and stuff there. We have to update our status JSON for some of our internal systems, gzip it, push the assets to CloudFront, and then we do these next 2 steps of registering the release to the server and informing it. Out of all that stuff, Mike had to write a 40-line plugin to do that packing up of the SaaS. Everything else is already available, so it was mostly just installing and configuring a few things. That last little step is a cool thing that I think is just awesome. It's called Lightning Deploy, which is a pattern, and it can be implemented in many, many ways. But the idea here is that you're able to ship an inactive release. And essentially, what you do is you do a build, you take all the assets, and you go put it up in the cloud or wherever you want, wherever your system is running. And if you add an entry to a list, so this is what the list was like last week, in this red line highlighting it says, okay, this is the current active SHA, but there's a newer one up there. So in our production environment, we can actually do this. And we do releases every Tuesday, but we were all out here. So last Friday, Mike pushed our release payload for this Tuesday up into our deployment environment, our prod environment. And then Tuesday morning, while we were having breakfast at Sherman's, Mike activated the release. And he ran this line of code, and whatever the SHA was on the end, you could copy and paste that. And then bang, our application rolled forward. That was our deploy process. This is pretty much how we do it every week. We sometimes have to sync with our back-end Rails application if they're rolling stuff, but it's really nice, right? We can roll our application forward and backward in a matter of seconds, which is really awesome. So should we happen to somehow miss like a critical unit test failure, we can push it up there, as things blow up, in 30 seconds we can be rolled back. So we really love us some Ember. And with that, I think we'll make sure Mike has a ton of time. We'll turn it over to you, and you switch over there.
How do I do that?
You on 3?
Yeah.
4?
3.
3. He's up here.
Oh, okay. So I'm going to, as Dave said, live code an app. It's not exactly like this, but it's pretty close to this. I want to show you what we're building before we start building it. Simple app that allows you to search ArcGIS online. So we can type a search string, hit enter, we'll get a map, we'll get search results that we can paginate, and we can also do a search right here from that page and get new search results. So pretty simple. That's what we're going to build. Now, first step, of course, as Dave mentioned, is to scaffold the app. I'm not going to skip it. I already did that. We're gonna come in after this step right here. I scaffolded the app. I ran Ember S. You can, oh, no, I didn't. We'll run Ember S, and we'll see our app. This is just a bare scaffolded Ember app. You get the welcome page with the Tomster. And it should be ready now. We'll refresh it, and that's what we see. So next step is just a little bit of housekeeping. Ember is opinionated, but on this instance, it's got a couple of different possible opinions that you can go with. And I'm just going to change the structure to use what they call the pods structure, which is just a layout a little different from the default. And it's going to cost us about a minute, but it'll probably save me a little time in the long run. What I did there just tells the generators that when you generate stuff for me, stick it in the folder structure based on the pod structure, not the default structure. And just a little bit of command line trickery to reshuffle the stuff that's already there. Okay, so now we're all set. What we see now is we've got our application folder. Our application template is in our application folder. Instead of called application.hbs sitting down in a templates folder, it's in application folder and it's called template.hbs. Don't worry too much about that. It's just an alternative structure to an Ember app that's going to work better for me while I run through this. So with that out of the way, we're going to add some CSS and some markup. We're going to add Bootstrap. That first line up there adds Bootstrap. If you were going to add Bootstrap for reals, you'd probably use an add-on, but we're going to try to save time by taking a little shortcut here. So we add the CSS. Now we'll open up that application template that we just saw and add this markup in. This is handlebars, but there aren't many curly braces. It's mostly just angle brackets, pretty familiar HTML. We do have this outlet down there. That's a funky thing. The application template is on the screen for the entire time your user has the application loaded. And any subroutes get rendered into the outlet. So that makes the application template a good place to put top nav or header, footer, that kind of thing. And so now we should see, oh, we have a build error. I screwed up already. And I have no idea what that means.
I think it's coming out of your SAS.
I think you're probably right.
Oh, doesn't work.
Occasionally when you get mysterious, there we go. When I get mysterious errors with Ember CLI, I just kill the server and run Ember S again. And yay, that solved that problem. And it often does. You'll probably actually see that happen again when I forget to restart it after I install an add-on. So there's our header that's rendered by our application template. Now we're going to scaffold some routes. Dave talked about generators. We're going to use an Ember CLI generator to scaffold the index route. And we'll see that it created an index directory and stuck a route and a template in there that we're going to put some code in now. I did this in advance so we can skip that step. We need a little bit more CSS. So we'll add just some Bootstrap CSS basically. And now in our index template that we just created that's going to get rendered, remember, into that outlet in our application template, we'll throw a Jumbotron. Just some, Bootstrap markup basically. A couple of interesting things going on here though. Our form uses the action helper. HTML bars has the concept of helpers that do various useful things for you. This is basically the way, the action helper is basically the way Ember handles events. So this says when the form is submitted, look up a do search function on the actions hash of this controller, call it and pass it Q. And we'll see that's not going to work yet. And we'll see, we'll make that work though in a minute. So we need to add that index controller. So we're going to generate it because we don't get a controller by default. Ember just sort of stubs a default one, and you create it if you need it. We need it, so we generate it, and we can add an actions hash with that do search function. And it just takes a queue and transitions to a new route called items, which doesn't exist yet. So this still isn't going to work. So let's add, so we'll just try it, but we'll pop open the console so we can see what goes wrong. And it says assertion failed, route items was not found. Useful error messages come out of Ember, which is really nice. It tells you exactly what the problem is. So we will do the next step, which is to scaffold the items route. Ember G route items. And now we've got an items directory with a route and a template in it. So we'll add some code to the route. And this is an Ember idiom. I don't know, did you talk about the model hook, Dave? I don't think you did.
I didn't. We didn't talk about any lifestyle hooks.
Okay, there are a couple of interesting things going on here. This is the route. So in Ember, there's a router down here that actually, when we generated that route, it stuck it in here. And the router's job is to map URLs to routes. So that's what's going on right there. And then the route itself, its job, its basically reason for existing is to load model data and pass it on to the controller. And that's what's happening here. In this case, we just sort of faked it for now, and all it does is return a JavaScript object with two properties. So Ember knows to call the model hook if it's present and pass that, whatever comes back from that, to the controller as the model. Something else that we're doing here is this is an Ember idiom for basically mapping URL query string parameters to properties of the route that we can data bind to, Q. That's how we were able to bind Q right here and send it along to this do search function. Oh, another thing that's going on in here is we're using the input helper, which is just an Ember wrapper over an HTML input with some handy stuff for binding, data binding also. So that's how that Q value from the query string gets down to that input element and actually back up out of it too. So we're going to add just a little bit of HTML or handlebars, HTML bars really, to the items template. And we're going to try to render your search for whatever the Q was with data binding, double curlies with that Q to bind to that value, yielded more double curlies to the model that I told you the model hook made available to this context, and then drill into it, dot into it to get the total. So hopefully I didn't break it again. Still looks like it's working. 1 second. Let's see if that works. Okay, it works as far as it goes. It knows that we searched for water and we got 0 items, which is true because we're not really doing a search yet. We're still returning that model with a hard-coded 0. Yeah?
Is Q JSON or HTML? I'm sorry.
Well, Q is JavaScript. It starts out right here as the query string parameter Q, and Ember reads that. The router basically reads that and passes it down to the route as the query parameter. And so it becomes available then. It's going to be available in here when we need it. We don't use it yet, really. We don't use it when we search yet, when we load our model, because we're not really loading a real model yet. But it is available in the context of this route as Q, just it's JavaScript, really.
And it could be anything. I mean, we're just using Q because that's kind of ArcGIS Online uses the Q parameter. It could be foo. There's nothing special about the fact it is Q. It's just, there's a lot of Emberism going on there. It's saying, oh, I know how to bind query parameters, and as long as you tell me what to expect, I'm going to bind it for you, right? It just hides all that stuff for you. That's the router's got magic in its pocket about how it does that stuff.
Yeah.
That's all.
Lots of magic in Ember, which is great. You just have to figure out what the opinion is and go with it. Okay, so that's working, like I said, as far as it goes. It doesn't really do anything interesting yet, but our data is flowing sort of the way we expect it to, from the query string down into this route. So next thing will be, we're going to add some nav up here at the top. We're going to use another add-on. Actually, maybe this is the first add-on I've installed, isn't it? We're going to use Ember CLI to install an add-on that's just basically a wrapper around, that didn't look right. That's not what I expected to see. That's suspicious.
No, it's just something odd.
Oh, it's just because it's so small.
I think so.
Yeah, I think you're right. Okay. So I installed that add-on. Now I'm going to restart my server, and now we can use it. And that's just a wrapper. It basically gives us this active link helper, which is basically route aware and puts an active class on the LIs that it generates, so that we get, I'll show you in a sec what we get. And remember, the application template is a good place to put stuff like nav. So now we've got home and items up here, and since we're at the items route, items is grayed out. We go to the home route, home is grayed out. Works if we refresh the page too. Nice little detail. Now we're going to add auth. Dave maybe wants to talk about this a little bit because he wrote this. We're going to install 3 add-ons, one of which he wrote, one of which are just sort of community contributions, and configure it so that we can get auth with ArcGIS Online.
Right, so the 3 things we're installing, one of them is Ember Network, which is a fetch polyfill. The fetch API is just a newer, nicer, promise-based way of doing XHRs. So that was the first one. Then there's Tori, which is an authentication kind of base class layer for Ember. There's another one called SimpleAuth. We happen to have chosen to build our stuff on top of Tori. And then there is a Tori provider for ArcGIS. And so essentially that is the piece that says, oh, I know how to do OAuth with ArcGIS.com. And it's got a number of extra components in it. And this is exactly what we use in all of our production apps and all of our scaffolded apps and all of our little add-on dummy apps, because for ArcGIS.com, working with your items, you need to be authenticated. So the next, once we add in the portal services provider, it knows how to grab the session and take the credentials out of that and use it. So that's really what's going on. There's some configuration here that has to happen. There's an API key. If you've done anything with applications on ArcGIS.com, when you set up an application, you get a key and you put it in there, and then you have to give it your valid redirect URL. And that's just all documented at developersarcgis.com. All we really need is this little bit of configuration, kind of in the main configuration store for your Ember app.
So now, I added those add-ons while Dave was talking, and dropped that little bit of configuration into config/environment.js. That's where configuration related stuff goes. And now I'm going to add a little bit more markup to our application template, just some bootstrappy markup to show whether you're logged in or not, and allow you to click on them to log in. So now we've got a sign-in link. Doesn't do anything yet. If we click on it, it says, hey, nothing handled the action sign-in. That's because that markup we just added wanted to call the sign-in action. When we used an action before, I specified it was on submit. The default is click, so we don't have to provide that. This just says when this element is clicked, look up the function called sign out on the actions hash of the controller, of the application controller. So now we want, oh, it's actually going to look it up on the route in that case. Now we want an application route. We don't have one yet. Ember was just using the defaults, stubbing it for us. So we'll scaffold that. Oh, and it's going to prompt me. It says, hey, there's already an application template. Do you want me to overwrite it? I'm going to say no, because I want the one I've been working on. So now we've got a route, and we're going to add those actions to it that our markup is looking for.
And so once just paste them in there, you got to put it in the route.
Yeah.
And then I'll tell you kind of what's going on with this. So the session system, this.get session, this is a service that's injected into all routes and all controllers, and you can actually request it be injected into virtually anything. It has an open method that will return a promise. You have to tell it which type of auth you want to use. In this case, we're using ArcGIS.com. If you built an app where you wanted somebody to be able to sign in with ArcGIS.com credentials and Facebook and Twitter, basically what you would do is change that string based on something in your UI. I want to sign in with Facebook. Once the promise resolves, you either have the authorization information, and that's tucked away in the session, and we would just transition to the index route. You would normally transition to some secured location. In the off chance that there was an error, then we actually kind of just bounce that back up to you. So you decide what you want to do if there's an authentication error on your part.
So if you have your own enterprise authentication service, you can just point it to that URL there?
If you have an ArcGIS portal, like on-prem, you can use that. But it has to either, yeah, that's how that would work. If you just have like LDAP or something like that, there are other providers that you can use to do that. So if you're building something that's not associated with a portal or ArcGIS.com, then you would use a different provider. That's the model. Yep.
You guys work with LDAP, so you kind of...
That's abstracted. So if you set up with your on-premise or your cloud-hosted org that you want to use a SAML provider, that's all hidden from you. All your application is going to need to know at the end of the day is your web app uses tokens. And all the rest of the SAML stuff hidden upstream, and your session will be provided with a full user graph, a graph of the current portal settings, and then the token.
So ultimately, I can get to the level of detail that I didn't.
Yeah, you can. If your org is set up to use SAML, it'll just be abstracted. Yeah.
And so now, since I implemented that sign-in method, our sign-in ought to work. We click sign-in, we get the pop-out, we say sign-in, and now it knows that we're signed in, so it gives us the sign-out link, which I think, did I implement? Yeah. Yeah, we implemented that too with just this line of code. So we can sign in again, but if I refresh the page, it didn't persist. So that's one problem that we're going to fix. Actually, no, first we're going to improve the UI a little bit by adding the Bootstrap JavaScript. Again, in a real app, you would want to do this with an add-on, but I'm going to take a little shortcut there and just add it from a CDN. And then we're going to improve our UI a little bit by adding this bit of handlebars in the application template.
And this is just simply going to make it like once you're signed in, we're going to give you a little drop down.
Yep.
That's all. And then you could do, that's where you would put like, oh, you want to have access to your admin app or something like that based on decisions about your credentials.
Yeah, and so Dave mentioned the session service that you get with Tori is injected into all your routes and controllers. That means that you can data bind directly to it just by going inside curly braces, double curlies, session dot whatever, in this case, is authenticated. And over here, session .current_user.fullname. And so,
IntelliSense for that?
excuse me?
Is there IntelliSense for that?
Ha.
There is an IntelliSense for it because it's not like a known thing inside the environment, but like in the network panel, you'll see that it's going to make a request to portal self, and all it does is take those objects that came back from portal self and attach it to current user and portal. So that's kind of the API. The Tory provider ArcGIS, if you go to that repo, there's a link to the dummy project which tells you all the things that you can access. So there's a whole bunch of helper methods, like are you a member of this group? Do you have this privilege? Do you have any of these privileges? All that sort of stuff. It understands it in the context of your ArcGIS objects.
So now we've got my username here, which is real nice, and we've got a sign out link and a drop down. We can sign back in again, but we're going to see it's still not persistent, so let's fix that by adding a little bit more code to our application route. We're implementing the BeforeModel hook here, which is one of the first things that happens when an Ember app spins up. So it's a good place to do this kind of thing. In BeforeModel, we're calling out to this function, which just basically initializes your session.
And that one's kind of worth noting. It's going to work here, but if you swing back to it, in this case, we want to catch a rejection here, because essentially what's going to happen if you say session.fetch, it's going to check its local storage cache to say, do I have credentials, or do I have an existing token? Is it still valid? All that sort of thing. But if it rejects, it's just basically saying, nobody signed in. I don't have any credentials. So you don't want that to cause an error. There's another interesting feature of Ember that if you throw or reject out of a BeforeModel, it will automatically take you to an error state. So you can just go and implement /error and give it anything, and the rejection that comes out of your BeforeModel handler is the model that goes into the other thing. Again, just kind of plumbing in Emberland to say errors are going to happen. Let's have a really standardized way to manage that.
And so now you can see that when we refresh, it still knows that I'm logged in. So that's nice. Now we'll get into something that's actually make this thing actually do something useful. We're going to install one of our team's add-ons, which Dave talked about. This is an add-on that allows you to talk to ArcGIS Online, the portal API. So we're going to install that add-on, and then we're going to make use of it in the items route to actually do real search. And when we installed Tory, we got that session service, and that was automatically injected into all of our routes and controllers. This service we don't automatically inject because you might not want it everywhere. So we just inject it on an ad hoc basis with this line right here. And when you've done that, you can do this right here, get it, this.get it, to get access to it, and then you can call functions on it. So.
And all this stuff it's all promiseified.
Oh, I broke something.
So.
Lovely.
What did you break now?
Oh, I installed it. So it's complaining because I.
Right, you installed an add-on, and when you do that, it kind of has to restart the server because the add-on goes into the node modules folder, and it needs to rescan the node modules folder to say, oh, hey, look, I found an add-on. Let me hoist all of its stuff into the context of my app.
So now we search for water, and now it at least knows that it found a whole bunch of items, but we're not displaying them yet. So I think next we'll do that, yeah. We're just going to grab a bunch of markup here, and we're going to add it to our items template. And what's going on here, the main thing that's interesting that's going on here is we're data binding to that model.results and looping through it and rendering a TR for each element in that array. So now we should actually see search results. There, oh yeah, there they were. Live reload. But we only get the first 10. There are 58,000 of them, but we only see the first 10. So we're going to add pagination. And that's another add-on that our team has built that is really easy to drop in and use. This time I'm going to remember to restart the server.
So this one's got a bunch of different components in it. It's just a whole suite of things that we reuse across a bunch of our apps. In it, one of the things is a item-aware pagination thing. So it knows how to handle, like, here's the response you got from online in your search response. It's going to figure out how to correctly set things up to page forward on that.
So we're going to add a couple more query string parameter bindings, basically, to the items route.
Because it's a web app, we don't want to break the internet. And we want to make sure that you have URLs, and if I copy the URL and I give it to somebody, it's going to show up on that page, right? So.
And now, in our model hook, we're actually going to use those query string parameters. So we were using, oops, not that. We were using Q before, but now we're passing to search. We're now passing num and start, our paging parameters. We also need those on the controller. We don't have a controller yet, so we're going to go ahead and scaffold that. And we're going to add the query params to that. And we have to, just a little bit of housekeeping, when you do a new search, like if you search for beer, then scroll to the 50th page, and then you do another search for water, and there are only 2 pages, you want to make sure you go back to page 1, or things are going to get wonky. Oops, wait, where does that go? Yeah. I got lost. Q. Oh, right.
App index controller.
There we go. And then, to actually make it work, we're going to use that item list pager component that came along with that add-on that we just installed, the Ember ArcGIS Open Data Components add-on, and then we'll have pagination. So, components, we've used a couple of components and some helpers. Components you invoke with the curly braces too, and then you treat them very much like custom HTML elements. You pass them attributes to sort of pass them data or customize their behavior. So we should see pagination now. Awesome.
Do you want to, we have like 4 or 5 minutes left. Do you want to huck it to Serge and we'll take questions while you're doing that?
Oh, I wasn't planning to do that, but I can.
Oh,
sure.
I didn't know what you were doing. I just threw him under the bus.
Yeah, I can do that.
Hey, why don't you deploy this to Serge?
Oh no, I'm
right
on
now?
it. I'm on it. So we're going to Ember install Ember CLI Serge.
I think that's it. I thought I saw that he was going to do that. Does anybody have any questions while he's, NPM installing some stuff?
I have a question.
Yep.
What does the deployment look like? Just copy the file over to Serge?
That's what I'm doing.
Well, that's what we're going to do here. So there's Ember Deploy allows you to do like a huge range of different things. The simplest possible deploy is you take what came out, you do Ember build minus production, and it says, okay, I'm going to build it, and I'm going to cram everything together, minify it, uglify it, all that good stuff. Take all the, so you can put like Ember debug statements all over your code, and those get stripped during the build process. Super nice. You just take that entire packet and you put it on a file server somewhere, HTTP, whatever, index HTML, lights up. What Mike is going to hopefully show here is deploying it to Serge. And so Serge is a cloud hosting thing. It's super simple. What's awesome is it will create an account for you. Like the first time you run this thing, it's like, oh, why don't you give me your name and stuff? And I'm just going to go take care of that for you. All right, light it up.
So I installed it, and as part of the install, it took the name of my app and just said, hey, this is what we're going to make your URL. So if we're cool with that, and I don't have to do anything. All I have to do now is run Ember Serge. And I already have an account, so it's not going to prompt me, I think. It's going to do a build, and then hook it up to Serge, and in a second we'll hit will hit this URL live on the internet.
Yeah, so I mean, obviously, Mike, is super speed coded by copy pasting a whole bunch of stuff and knew exactly where to put things. So how did we figure out where to put things? There's a really good book called Rock and Roll with Ember, and it's an ebook, and they constantly update it, which is awesome. And highly recommend that. This is what we have everybody on our team read as kind of okay, let's learn Ember and kind of get everybody up to a baseline in how Ember works. That's essentially like all the ways that we knew to put these little pieces of code in the right places. That's the book to do it with. And did it work?
Yeah.
Okay, so that's the deployment.
There it is. Another good resource.
I mean, that's, apparently Surge is something that you can run production things on, and if I think you have to pay if you want it to be not on .surge.sh or something. But it's a really cheap, hosting situation.
This is another good resource, I think, Ember Igniter.
Yeah. Our stuff is hosted, we CloudFront everything, but that's, a very, very standard pattern. And there's all sorts of Ember Deploy plugins for sending it to virtually everything. Go for it.
All right. So if you were multiple people developing the same app, how would you code share, or how would you do the control? Or
So we use GitHub.
Okay.
Straight up Git. I mean, that's the probably the easiest way to do all that stuff.
Yeah,
and that's exactly how we do it. I mean, obviously we try not to step on each other. Like, we don't go into the same component and then fight about it, because that's just going to be a merge conflict problem. But Ember is very component driven. So what you want to do is you get a route and you put in the basic scaffolding that you need for that, and then everything below that should be components. And so then you have this kind of decomposability or reuse, and you also have the fact that Mike and I can work on the search results page, and we're actually just working in separate components, and we don't have conflict. It's also much easier to write good tests against really small components. Any other questions? Yep.
I've tried to do this a couple times, but I always stumble on the map. So how do you pass things like between a grid or something like that from the map back, kind of from the grid to the map and back, different components?
Yeah. So that is a challenging thing, right? You got to take Ember and you say, okay, Mr. Map, over here in Dojo land. So there's a bunch of work you need to do using Ember CLI AMD to actually do the loading. So that then gets it into your application. So one of the philosophies, and Tom gave a good description of this the other day, we did a full day workshop on using Ember and everything else. And he pointed out that one of the good ideas with any sort of external dependency you have is try to push it to the edge of your app. Right? Use some sort of abstraction within your application framework and push it out there. So we tend to use, and you probably have this up here. Oh, this is the actual workshop. So if you want to go through the workshop, this is Tom Wason Ambitious ArcGIS app. And there is if you scroll down, there's a workshop folder that's got markdown files in it, which are exactly what, essentially what Mike just walked through. And so it talks about how to do the map. We tend to use Ember services to kind of push the map over there, and then we will create that service as the API surface that we want to work with. So we don't kind of let the idiosyncrasies of that map leak up. We build an API surface that makes sense in the context of our app. So we'll push things, over to it, and then it manipulates things, and then we can use Ember evented on that service to bubble back events that we need. But we try to keep, all the ESRI imports on that side of the wall, and then everything else is Ember. And the other reason we do that is services are very easy to mock. And so in your actual tests, you don't have to, Dojo will be loaded, but you don't have to instantiate a map and load a web map and have all this stuff running when you want to run, like hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of tests in just a few seconds. So that level of indirection is a really powerful thing, and that's the pattern we use, is to hide it behind a service. Did that answer the question?
Enough.
Okay, yeah, I mean, and the other thing we do is we don't use any digits, right? There's the map, and then everything else around it is going to communicate to the map through that service, and then anything that the rest of the app needs to be notified about, you click on the map and you select something, or you do some geoprocessing, you get the number 32 back, that will come back out through the service, and then everything outside of it is just using normal Ember binding and computer properties and things like that. Anyone else? Oh, no, there's a guy in the back.
When you're creating a dashboard using Ember, how easy is it to use the OAuth just to continue spreading it across the platform?
When you're creating a dashboard using Ember, how easy is it to use the OAuth?
Yes.
Oh, like we just did it, like
Yeah,
that.
the authentication. You were using a single page, right?
Well,
it's
this was a multi-route. I mean, it was a single-page app, but multi-routes. There was the items URL. If I'd gotten farther.
Yeah. So unlike say the ArcGIS.com home app, when you go to like the search page and then you go to the item page, that's a full page refresh, right? Boom! It just threw everything out in the rehydrated state when you transitioned. In an Ember app, it's all in your app.
Yeah, if you're using pagination.
We're using pagination and you're going to transition. So if we went this walkthrough that we did the other day, do we build an item route? I don't remember.
No,
anyway.
I do that. Well, I can show that actually. I can check out the master branch.
Yeah, we're a little bit over, but I don't think anybody's running in here right now. Actually, I'm the next talk in here in like 30 minutes, so we can talk as long as we want. But all of that gets bundled in. So your whole routing structure and where you would normally do a full page reload is going to be in your Ember app. And one of the things I kind of mentioned really quickly at the beginning was you can package up a subsection of routes and lazy load that. So that's how you can do that. In terms of if you wanted to say, well, for some reason you have separate apps, the way that works in terms of having the auth flow forward is, one thing is if you're using managed identities, you're all on Windows and you're using OAuth and our Active Directory and a SAML provider, that's just going to flow right from your browser up into the app and your credentials show up. If you're not doing that, then if you're hosted on the same domain as your portal, then the cookie is automatically going to be available and everything can just use the cookie, and our the identity provider thing that we plugged in just here, the Tori provider, that will use cookies and pick it up and use it. Otherwise, your app, once Tori is booted up, it's going to store it in local storage. And then that, of course, local storage is bound to a particular domain and application space. So that won't flow forward.
So this is that app that I just built, only on this branch I got farther. I had more to build if I had time. And so we have this extra column in the table where you can click the info button and get a detail, and there's a detail page. So it's a nested route. It's hard probably for you to see in the back, but now the URL is whack items, whack the ID of that item.
Yeah. And it's all just running, so the auth is continuously present.
And like, for instance, if we click this home link, we're going to go to the home page. We're just going to go to /, but it's not a full page reload. It's if we keep the network tab open, we won't see another request for the document. It just requested that banner image because the app remained loaded.
So that's the difference. I mean, this is, if you can build an app in this style, instead of like a 2 to 3 second page refresh, you're talking 100 milliseconds, 150 milliseconds.
The downside is initial page load is going to be a bit slower, but once it's loaded, transitioning between routes is going to be very snappy.
Cool. Well, thank you very much for coming. If you have the little app on your phone, please rate our session. We like to pitch that. That helps people know, like, yay, we liked Ember, boo, they were terrible, whatever. But it is nice to get some sort of feedback. So thanks again for coming right before the dodgeball. Have fun.